State Department officials stationed around the world are protesting the travel ban put in place by President Trump. Roughly 1,000 State Department staffers signed a memo that started circulating over the weekend. The memo says President Trump's policy will not make our country safer and that it runs counter to core American values. Nicholas Burns is an international relations professor at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and the former U.S. ambassador to NATO. And he joins us now. Ambassador, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Elaine. Thanks very much.
So you are one of 100 former diplomats and military and intelligence officials who signed a separate letter protesting this travel ban. Why did you feel the need to do that?
I think we all felt the need because the United States is a refugee and immigrant nation. We've always taken in refugees and immigrants, and since 9/11, we've taken in over 800,000 refugees with very few problems. The system is not broken. Of course, you want to review border security. Of course, it's vitally important that we do everything we can to protect our borders, and we have an obligation to do that. But to shut down refugee admissions, to freeze all refugees coming in from Syria when Syria is the worst humanitarian crisis since 1945, and then to severely curtail immigration, it's not smart on policy terms because it's not necessary to do this. It does give the Islamic State and other terrorist groups the ability to say that we're anti-Muslim because there's a perception this is a ban on Muslims, and it's very much against American values, the values that we hold dear over the last 2 centuries.
It's one thing for former officials to protest. What does it tell you that current officials have now signed their own letter?
This is an extraordinary development. Over 1,000 State Department diplomats, career diplomats who've served both parties, have now submitted a dissent channel message. There's a formal channel in the State Department that allows officers to express disagreement. It's a confidential channel. We actually encourage people to think critically, knowing that in the end, when the president makes a decision, they will implement that decision. And I think it's extraordinary that so many Foreign Service officers have done so. It may be the largest such group of diplomats to have signed such a letter since this formal process was instituted in 1971. It shows you the depth of sentiment within our career diplomatic corps, which is a non-political corps of people. They serve both parties, that they're opposed to what this order says, that the United States should not take in immigrants and should not take in refugees.
A recent Reuters poll, though, found that 49% of Americans agreed with this order, 41% disagreed. White House spokesman Sean Spicer said in a briefing earlier this week that these career diplomats should either, quote, get with the program or they can go.
That's exactly the wrong message, and I hope that Sean Spicer and the administration have a chance to correct that, because we should want our career diplomats, our career civil servants, to think critically. We should want them to speak up internally in a confidential way, not out in public, when they disagree with something. When I was in the State Department, we encouraged this. There's actually an award in the State Department given to people who express dissent in the most constructive way. Our career diplomats should not be automatons, and they should be respected by this administration, and they should not be told somehow that if they have views that are contrary to the administration, they ought to resign. That's not the American way. It's not the way that any administration has ever treated our career diplomatic corps.
What are the ramifications, you think, of this executive order in terms of our relationships with the 7 countries listed in the ban and others?
Well, I think the problem here is the executive order, in my judgment, was wrong on policy grounds, but it was also implemented very poorly and ineffectively. There were no consultations with the Congress of the United States. There were no consultations that I'm aware of with our NATO allies or with our friends in the Middle East, like the Iraqi government. We are fighting with Iraq right now for Mosul. Our troops and Iraqi troops are fighting together, and the Iraqis were taken completely by surprise when they were one of these 7 countries listed that no visitors visitors from these countries can enter the United States. So I think the Trump administration has to review its procedures, practice diplomacy, consult with Congress, even especially involve the State Department and the Defense Department, the U.S. military, as you think about these measures, and not think that you can simply issue pronouncements from the White House and have that go down well with the rest of our government or the rest of the world.
On Wednesday, Rex Tillerson was confirmed by the Senate as Secretary of State. What is the task that lies before him now, in your view?
He's a very impressive man. I wish him well. I think he's got a lot of challenges in front of him. Obviously, he needs to come in and take command of the State Department and convey respect to the Foreign and Civil Service, and of course, get them on his team. He obviously needs to close the gap with the White House. The White House seems to be almost acting on its own with these executive orders. And of course, most of us would like to see our Secretary of State and Defense to be given substantial authority in the government. And Elaine, as you know, major crisis in Europe with a weakening European Union, with Vladimir Putin threatening the independence of several countries. There's war in the Middle East. There are challenges with China. This is one of the most complex foreign policy agendas in a very long time. I think Rex Tillerson can be a very strong Secretary of State and an effective one. He's going to need a lot of help from the White House, and that entails a good working relationship with the White House.
Speaking of complex foreign policy agendas, let's talk about Iran. On Wednesday, National Security Advisor Mike Flynn had a message for Iran after the country tested a ballistic missile. Here's what he said. Let's take a listen.
Recent Iranian actions involving a provocative ballistic missile launch and an attack against a Saudi naval vessel conducted by Iran-supported Houthi militants underscore what should have been clear to the international community all along about Iran's destabilizing behavior across the entire Middle East. President Trump has severely criticized the various agreements reached between Iran and the Obama administration, as well as the United Nations, as being weak and ineffective. Instead of being thankful to the United States in these agreements, Iran is now feeling emboldened. As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice.
Ambassador, how do you think that message is going to be received in Tehran?
Well, I think that President Trump and General Flynn are right to be concerned about the aggressive actions of Iran in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. Iran is a major problem in the Middle East, and so they're right to point to those problems. I wonder if this is the best way to do it. We actually have a way to talk to the Iranians now through our Secretary of State to the Iranian Foreign Minister, and I wonder if a private message would be effective. I also wonder if this is just a judgment call. Each administration does things differently. If General Mattis would have been the best person to have conveyed this message publicly. He's an expert in the Middle East. He's a former commander of CENTCOM, our military command in the Middle East, four-star Marine general, now Secretary of Defense. He has great credibility on this issue. So that's a tactical issue of who you put out to deliver such a message. And of course, we're putting Iran on notice was the final sentence of that. That in international politics is a very stark warning, and I hope the Trump administration is thinking through all the ramifications of that going forward. Elaine, I'd say one more thing. I was sorry to see the direct criticism of President Obama in this message. This should have been a message directly to the Iranian government, and to have criticized President Obama twice in one short paragraph, I thought that was unwise and uncalled for. And let's not mix domestic politics with these very serious issues of American national security.
Ambassador, just to be clear, that last part of that sentence that you noted, we are officially putting Iran on notice. Is that a suggestion that there could perhaps be some kind of military action?
Well, that is what is, if I were overseas in the Iranian government listening to this, I would think that implicitly we were threatening military force against Iran. And I want to say, Elaine, I support President Trump in being concerned about what the Iranians are doing, but we need to be very careful to be sure that we can back up any threats that we make, and careful that we're working with our Arab partners in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, our European allies on this, Israel. This is a very complicated situation, and I also think we ought to be talking to the Iranians directly and letting them know how concerned we are with their behavior. I think that's probably the more effective thing to do right now.
All right. Ambassador Nick Burns, thank you so much, Ambassador, for your insight. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.